It's just not even funny.
1955, a young African-American teen from Chicago, Illinois, went to visit family in Money, Mississippi. While there, he allegedly made inappropriate and rude comments towards a woman of the town. The woman complained to her husband, who got his brother, and went to kidnap, assault, and eventually murder the teen. The men then proceeded to throw him into the Tallahatchie River, where he was later found. This teen's name was Emmett Till, and his murder and subsequent legal proceedings sparked an already growing sentiment in the South into a full civil rights movement. I believe that everyone should learn and know about the civil rights movement, because without a complete and clear knowledge of the past, we cannot expect to correctly move forward and correct the wrongs being done to certain groups in this day and age. I decided on this topic because I feel as if too many citizens of our country do not know enough about what our forefathers sacrificed to try and achieve racial parity for all. I have compiled sources and materials from the Anti-Defamation League, the History Channel, and the National Humanities Center to form and support my speech. In this speech, I will firstly be informing you on the events and laws that led to the beginning of the civil rights movement, such as the Emmett Till murder, the Little Rock Nine, Jim Crow laws, and Rosa Parks. Secondly, I will be informing you on the political showings enforced by activists, such as the Freedom Riders and the March on Washington by Dr. King and others. Finally, I will be telling you about the laws passed due to the civil rights movement, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Let's begin with the events and laws that led to the civil rights movement. The Jim Crow laws were a set of laws that enforced racial segregation of colored people in the southern United States. These laws were in place from the Reconstruction era, immediately following the Civil War in the 1860s until 1965. These laws were put in place to ensure that blacks were marginalized and kept below whites. This was done by making sure blacks could not go to the better schools for white people nor the other public facilities, and could not even marry between races. It also included a voter literacy test, which was aimed at keeping blacks from voting. These laws were the base of tensions between races, as multiple generations lived under these laws in the South. As I mentioned before, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American boy from Chicago that went to Money, Mississippi, and was accused of offending a white woman, who told her husband. Her husband decided to kidnap, beat, mutilate, and eventually shoot Emmett to death. After this, they threw Emmett's now lifeless body into the Tallahatchie River. Once found, Emmett's mother, Mamie Till, insisted on an open casket funeral so that the world could see what they did to her baby. The anger over their murder was one of the first moments where a noticeable call for change was raised. On December 1st, 1945, a 42-year-old woman named Rosa Parks found a seat at the front of a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Segregation laws stated that blacks must sit at the back, and Rosa was arrested over this. This led to a local Baptist minister, Martin Luther King, to lead protests against the arrest of Ms. Parks. Dr. King led the Montgomery Improvement Association in a year-long boycott of the bus system, which eventually led to the U.S. Supreme Court declaring the segregation system unconstitutional.
Just come sit.
Just come sit. There you go. The system, on September 3rd, 1947, a group of black students arrived at the funeral at Central High School in Arkansas. They tried to take classes there, but were met by the Arkansas National Guard and a screaming mob of white people, and were turned around. Little Rock Nine, as they were known, tried to enter several weeks later, but were removed again due to dangers to their life. Finally, President Eisenhower intervened and ordered federal troops to escort the Nine to and from classes. These advancements led to colored citizens realizing that through organized and well-implemented protests, they could achieve the racial parity that they had desired for so long. You discussed the underlying causes and first incidents of the civil rights movement. Now let's consider the political showings of force that followed. On May 4, 1961, 14 Freedom Riders, 7 white and 7 black, got on a Greyhound bus in Washington, D.C., embarking on a tour to protest segregated bus terminals in the South. They were protesting the 1960 Supreme Court decision declaring interstate transportation segregation illegal. Facing violence from both police and white protesters, the riders drew international attention. On Mother's Day in Anniston, Alabama, a mob mounted a bus and threw a bomb on it. After this, no drivers wanted to take the group any further. U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, brother of John F. Kennedy, found the group another driver. They were eventually arrested in Jackson, Mississippi, but the convictions were overturned by the Supreme Court and drew more people to the cause. One of the most famous events of the civil rights movement took place on August 28, 1963, the March on Washington. It was organized and attended by civil rights icons such as A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and MLK Jr. More than 200,000 people, both black and white, congregated in D.C. This is where Martin Luther King gave his iconic I Have a Dream speech, which quickly became a staple of the civil rights movement. Talked about the political showings, now we will talk about the legal advancement that happened due to the civil rights movement. Civil Rights Act of 1964 was signed by Lyndon Johnson, but was initiated by President John F. Kennedy prior to his assassination into law on July 2nd of that year. Dr. King and other activists witnessed the signing. The law guaranteed equal employment, limited use of voter literacy tests, and allowed federal authorities to ensure public facilities were integrated. Voting Act of 1965 took the Civil Rights Act one step further. It banned all literacy tests and provided federal examiners in certain voting jurisdictions. Also allowed the Attorney General to contest state and local poll taxes. Fair Housing Act of 1968 was signed on April 11th of the same year, just days after Martin Luther King's assassination. It prevented housing discrimination based on race, sex, national origin, and religion. It was also the last piece of legislation enacted during the Civil Rights Movement, which was a precarious yet empowering time for black citizens of America. Efforts of activists and protesters brought about legislation to end segregation, black voter suppression, and discriminatory employment and housing practices. Main 3 points for the events leading up to the Civil Rights Movement: the political showings and force of the Civil Rights Movement, and the laws that were put in place of the Civil Rights Movement. As the difference between the world Emmett Till lived in and the world we live in now shows, we should always remember and appreciate the impact and example that the great men and women of the Civil Rights Movement instilled in the United States. There's my audience. Alright.